Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Scott McKain joining us. Scott, welcome.
Michael, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Scott, for those who aren't familiar with your work, just take a moment and explain what you do.
Michael, I combine a number of different things, whether it's professional speaking, that was really the start of all this, writing books about business. I just released my seventh book, and then doing some consulting work and training involved with that as well. So for me, it starts with the book that gets an organization interested and books me for a speech, and then they want a deeper dive, which leads into more education and training.
Got it. All right. And so before you kind of hit the speaking circuit and became known through that channel, take us back. Like, what were you doing in the early days before you were speaking and writing books and consulting with organizations?
Well, it's a great question, Michael, because I've got a very different background as compared to most in the field. Many years ago, I was a national officer of a student organization, and that required you to take first a year off of college to be I was state president in my home state of Indiana, then later national officer of the organization. And so it required you to take a leave of absence from college to travel and speak. And so I'm, 21 years old, traveling, giving speeches to adults about the student organization, seeking their support, or other students that were members. And so parents would be in the audience and they would say, hey, I'm the president of a local bank. My tellers need to hear that talk. Would you come give that? So I paid my way through college, traveling and giving these little, hopefully uplifting speeches. They didn't have to be that good. When you're 21, they're just amazed you can get up and talk, I think. And so I thought, if I take this seriously and treat this as a business, there's potential there. I went to work for my alma mater upon graduation from college, and I was in charge of the annual giving program. And I was very fortunate that during the first year there, we doubled gifts to the fund. And the college offered me a raise of $1,000. So I kind of decided at this point, maybe there was more incentive in having my own firm than in higher education. So I just started, more than anything else, I was a relater of stories. I would travel particularly to smaller communities because my background is from a small community and like a local chamber of commerce meeting. And what would happen is if you're young and you're sincere and you want to learn, people love to help. And so I would have I'd have an entrepreneur come up and say, oh, well, here's a good idea that you might use. And it really was a good idea. So my next speech, I'd say, hey, last night in Dubuque, Iowa, a business owner said this. Well, one of two things would happen, Michael. Either I would notice other business owners writing it down, or someone would come up with a better idea. Well, I did that for almost a decade, and it was just one of the best practical learning laboratories you could ever imagine.
So for you, Scott, what was the kind of the turning point, or maybe it was a realization where you went from giving these talks to saying, okay, you know what, I could actually create a business around this? Because I'm very interested to know, what was your real path to becoming a consultant or working with organizations as you were working through these stages across the country?
I was very fortunate to have a mentor that heard me speak and helped me in terms of the speaking aspect. But I will never forget, I was doing a program in St. Louis. After it was over, the CEO came up and said, you shared some very, very strong ideas. Can I pick your brain? And I totally remember the ballroom in St. Louis at the airport hotel where that happened, because it was the first time an executive ever asked me that. And I shared that with some other speakers, and they said, well, that's the genesis of consulting, is that you have a field of expertise or some kind of area, or you've triggered a thought, or you have an objective viewpoint that the people that are in the trenches doing it day after day after day want to know. In addition, when I worked at the college, we hired a consultant in the field of fundraising, and he kind of became my fundraising mentor. And as silly as this sounds, I remember it was shared with me how much he was making as the consultant, and he was making more to consult me than I was making, working 50, 60 hours a week trying to raise money. And I thought, I'm in the wrong field. That was very naive and very early in my business. But I realized at that point, I guess, the power and the value and the impact of ideas and of perception and what we can do as consultants, regardless of our specific, expertise, what we can really do to help move the needle for organizations.
Well, Scott, so let me ask you, because today your clients include Intel, Remax, Cisco, BMW, SAP. These are all organizations that you've worked with in one form or another. And what you really help organizations do, from what I see in terms of your messaging or kind of the way that you're positioned in the marketplace, is to help organizations create and deliver distinction.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? I mean, can you offer a tangible example for everyone, or maybe two examples of what delivering and creating distinction is all about?
Interestingly enough, I've just released a new book called Iconic, which I'm terming as the ultimate level of distinction. And as a specific example, I did some work for Fairmont Hotels, and one of their specific properties, the Fairmont Princess in Scottsdale, approached me and they said, so how do we really make this work? Help us make this work. And so, for example, we talked about what is distinctive. Well, it's standing out from the competition in a very specific, recognizable, tangible way. How do you measure that? Well, not only our NPS scores, for example, but also, how much is room occupancy going up? How many repeat guests do we have? How many businesses bring meetings back repeatedly? There are a number of measurements for that you can establish, and all of them, in fact, tell the story. So we work with them on what does distinctive housekeeping look like? What's a distinctive valet parker? What's a distinctive front desk? We went through all of those with them. And then they decided, okay, so what's the ultimate level? And part of what we learned through that process is we have to help organizations who so many times are fixated on the competition to really think about developing their own game plan and executing and really owning something. I define distinctive as you stand out from your competition in a recognizable manner. But iconic is you're recognized beyond your own industry. In other words, Starbucks isn't a distinctive coffee shop, oft used example, a cliche, but Starbucks is iconic because they transcend their industry. Mm-hmm. So the goal for any, department or professional or organization is, how do I become so good that I'm thought of as a best practice, so to speak, that what we do is so good that it transcends the boundaries of our own industry. Quick example. So what the Scottsdale Princess decided to do was, we're going to own Christmas in Scottsdale. If you think about it, there's no meetings going on. And a lot of times people don't like staying at hotels over the holidays. So it's probably their time of least occupancy during the year. And they created this very innovative plan to become the go-to destination in their community of Phoenix for Christmas. And now the governor comes to open it, and it has gotten, universal recognition as one of the greatest celebrations of the holidays, complete with an ice skating rink in the middle of the desert and some really, really incredible things that they're doing. Well, now their occupancy rate is as high at Christmas as it is during, January, February, which is their primary times, because they did something not just with a focus on the competition, but how do they transcend their own industry?
Yeah, I love those examples. So thank you for sharing them. I'm going to put you just on the spot here for a moment. This makes a lot of sense, but let's say for the consultant, the solo consultant or the consulting firm owner who's listening to this going, well, okay, I could see those applications in a larger, maybe more complex organization with a big budget and, a lot of moving parts. But what about for the consultant or the consulting firm owner? What steps could they take? What tangible actions could they implement? Or even what ways could they apply critical thinking to create their own, kind of iconic brand or iconic company, or to begin by creating more distinction in their business?
A great question, Michael. One of the examples I use in the book Iconic is the multimillionaire chimney sweep in Nashville, Tennessee. So it's not specific about the size of the organization of the firm. And one of the hardest things for me in my business, part of what happened in my life and in my business is I went through a tragedy. I lost my first wife to cancer. And when that happened, obviously, as the sole caregiver, it was hard for me to take on new projects. I couldn't travel and speak. And so I kind of had to shut my business down for a period of time. And so when I was relaunching the business, I asked clients if they recommended me, what did they say about me? Which I think is a great question for consultants to, particularly solopreneurs or small shops, to say, if we ask the NPS question, would you recommend me? But we don't follow it up with, I think it's a more insightful, more meaningful question, which is, if you were to recommend me, what would you say? Mm-hmm. And what I found out, my clients were saying, good speaker, good consultant, really nice guy. Well, I want to be a nice guy and I want to be good at what I do, but could there be a more bland or generic recommendation than that?
All right.
No business owner is going to say, for a consultant, get out there and get me a really nice gal. Get a really nice guy.
Right. On your website, I'm Scott. I'm the nice guy. Hire me.
Hire me, right? I mean, nobody's going for that.
Yeah.
And so what I realized is there had to be a particular point that set my practice apart. So I started researching. I found great books. Al Trout wrote one called Differentiate or Die. There were a lot of books on it. But it was more about how did you observe your competition and find these little points of differentiation? And most of them had been written before the explosion of social media, particularly LinkedIn, and all those places that consultants go to say, this is what I do. Mm-hmm. And I really found it hard to differentiate. And then the blinding flash, the obvious was, if I'm finding this difficult in my practice, what are the chances that there are other businesses out there that are looking for the same information? So what I would suggest to any consultant, and this is really hard to do, the first step to differentiate yourself is extraordinary clarity about what you bring to the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And for the smaller practice, that is so tough because it means that there's going to be more times that you have to go, that's not what I do. Mm-hmm. That's not what we do. And particularly in a smaller firm or for a solo consultant, man, oh man, when you've got a client waving a check in your face, it is really, really tough to say, no, that's not in my wheelhouse.
And why is that a bad thing? So, someone's starting up at early stages. They have someone who's approached them and says, hey, can you help us? We can pay you. What is the real downside of saying okay to that?
Look, at the beginning of my speaking career, I did say okay to it because you've got to put food on the table and you've got to pay your bills. I get that. But what I learned through the process is you cannot differentiate a generic.
Yeah. Good point. And
if you can't be very precise and specific about where your expertise is and what you do that, I'm sure you do too, Michael. I see these claims on LinkedIn, the number one consultant in sales. Well, who says that? Where did that? I think many of us get in times of desperation and we make these unsubstantiated claims. Okay, given that, what we have to do is to develop this very precise and specific base. This is what I do. And are there ways that we can broaden that and expand that? Yeah, once our flag is in the ground. I find it interesting, for example, in the pizza business, that if I stand up and say, your pizza in 30 minutes, everybody thinks of Domino's, even though they haven't made that claim for 25 years.
Right.
But Domino's differentiates themselves as a delivery business. Mm-hmm. If I say better ingredients, better pizza, everybody thinks of Papa John's, even though most of their locations also deliver. Mm-hmm. So what they've done is they've planted their flag in the ground at a specific point. And it's not like Domino's are saying, our pizzas are crummy, but they get there fast, right? I mean, they're trying to improve their product quality. And Papa John's is doing it. But they had to get their flag in the ground first before they could broaden the base. That's the mistake I see that I made in my career. And the mistake I see many consultants is they start out broad and they never get to the point that there's their flag in the ground, that this is what I do. This is what I'm known for. This is what I'm a specialist at. Now, we both know in many situations with clients, the consulting relationship, is good and it grows. And they start asking us naturally our opinions on areas outside what we're seeing as our expertise. I think it's fine to help a client that we know their organization. I'm not saying for a second that we turn that down. I'm just saying that unfortunately, because the press for business for smaller groups like practices like I have and many of your listeners have, we do it opposite of what it should be, right? Instead of starting precise and growing, we start big, and then it becomes even more difficult to be precise because we're not known for that field. We're known as a generic, and to change that is really challenging. It's so much easier to position than to reposition.
So, Scott, what did you do? I mean, you went out, you asked for feedback, and because I think we could just maybe illustrate with your example a bit for the benefit of everyone.
Sure.
You got general feedback. So what was your next step? I mean, you had this realization that this was challenging for you to really create differentiation within your own business. Other businesses likely also had those challenges. So what did you do next? What decisions did you make, or what were some of the kind of the best practices that you implemented that really helped you to get more clarity around your offerings and ultimately create that higher level of distinction in your practice?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
For me, there were a couple things. And it was one, just from a business standpoint, I think writing a book is critical. Not that it has to be a New York Times bestseller, not that it has to be, on every shelves at every Barnes and Noble across the country. Mm-hmm. But it really becomes your positioning statement. It becomes a serious piece of work that you can show your thoughtfulness about your specialty. So what I realized is if I was going to, put my flag in the ground about point of distinction and being iconic, I needed to write a book about it. But the thing it also does, and this is the unintended benefit or unintended consequence of it, it really forces you to clarify your thinking. As a consultant, we can sit and have conversations. And, if I'm talking do a lot of work with Volkswagen Australia, if I'm talking to Michael Barsh, who's the managing director, CEO of Volkswagen Australia, I can tell if the way I'm expressing myself is connecting with him. And if it's not, I can back up and I can try it again, or I can use more statistics or a different story. You can't do that in a book. Your thinking has to be so precise that whoever has that book. So writing the book forces precision of thinking. And that was incredibly beneficial to me. For example, a quick example. I knew that clarity in the process was important, and I knew that creativity and innovation in the process was important. But I didn't know which went first, right? My assumption was I need to start out being more innovative than my competition. Well, that's not true. What I found through the research and going through the process of writing the book was clarity comes first. And then within the boundaries of that clarity, then you get creative. Part of the problem with think outside the box is we haven't really defined the box. So therefore, right, we don't know if we're thinking outside of it or not. And so going through that process forced me to be more analytical. It forced me to be more precise. And it also, I'm sure you've heard this and probably said it a million times, Michael, the great thing about a book is it's the best calling card, the business card that any consultant can have.
Sure. And let's use that as an example then just for a moment. So you've written your first book. It's helped you to really distill and get clear on your area of expertise and how to define that and create kind of points of distinction around that. How did you now leverage that book? Because there's plenty of people who have written books but have never seen any real benefit from those books because they haven't got them out into the world. So what did you do specifically to leverage that book and get it into the hands of your ideal clients to grow your business?
Here's just a few ideas that could help folks with that. For example, every company that I mentioned in the book, I put a little tab on there, just like one of those little Post-it note tabs on the pages that they were discussed, and I sent it to them. You and I both know if you're the CEO of CDW, the CEO of CDW, he tells me, probably every day he gets a book from some business person or some consultant, and he'll glance at them and, that's great, but he doesn't have time. But when my book came in and it was flagged with the specific pages, then when I was in fundraising, you put out your annual report. And what we realized from the research on the annual report is no one read it, but you flip to your class year, first of all, to find your name and then to find the names of the other people that you went to class with to see how much they gave the college. Okay, so based on that thinking, I know they're not going to read my book, but they might flip to the page to see what I said about their company, which in turn might hook them to read a little bit more about the book. Or the CEO might hand it off to the VP of marketing or the VP of sales and say, hey, I just got this. See what you think. Well, now, if I send the VP of sales the book, it's probably not going to get read. If the CEO hands that same book to the VP of sales, he's up all night reading it, and so it changes the dynamic. That was the first thing I did. The second thing I did is then to go and say, who are the competitors of the companies that I've named in this book? And I would flag their competitor and I would say, your competition is creating distinction. If there's a way that I can help you rise to this level, let's talk about what we can do in the next steps. All right. So now you're challenging them with your content. So naturally, they want to dig into the material and see what their competition is doing that they are not.
Did you receive any negative responses from that? Because I can see some people might be listening to this and saying, well, isn't that a bit too direct or too harsh? Or are you putting them down by saying that they're not as good as this other company that you've mentioned?
Well, the other thing that I did, and I appreciate you mentioning that, is I said, is there something I've neglected to say about your company so that I can make certain that I can include that in my next book?
Terrific.
Right? So now we begin a dialogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
The third thing I did, Michael, is then the other question that I would ask is, who is your customer's customer? How can I help you with them? So, for example, did a project with Bridgestone. Well, one of the things that I realized was if they needed that information and are willing to pay for it, what's the likelihood that the people that sell their tires, their customers, what's the likelihood they need it? In other words, Bridgestone wants to connect at a higher level with Discount Tire and Tire Barn and all the other tire retailers. But those tire retailers want to connect better with their customers to beat those other tire retailers. What if Bridgestone financed my work with them? And so what was a nice project turned into an amazing contract simply because companies will pay consultants a lot to help that company. But what I found is they'll pay just as much or even more to sponsor you to help their customers to truly enhance and strengthen the bonds that they have with their customers.
Was that a conversation that you brought to the table, or was that something that they initiated with you?
It was an idea that I shared with them, but that the CEO really picked up on. Part of how, when we began the conversation is, think about how much they spend as an organization in terms of trying to impress their customers. Think of what they spend just to exhibit at trade shows or sponsoring a luncheon or a cocktail hour at every, meeting that those folks have. It's not breaking their budget to divert, nobody remembers who sponsored the cocktail party. But if I could go in and help the leadership of a tire retailer understand what they could do to stand out from their competition, man, that they'll never forget that. And that's truly strengthened the bonds that they have with the home company. So all of those are ways that we as small and solo consultants can grow our practices, but also get deeper within any organization.
Well, and what I want to also just point to here, Scott, for everyone listening, is the example you just shared is so important. I mean, what you helped that client to do in terms of making the case was to help them to see that just reallocating some of the resources they're already spending could provide them with a greater ROI and more value. And that's a conversation that as a consultant can be so powerful and so compelling and so much more effective than trying to have an organization find new funds.
Right.
Let's just talk about what you're doing right now. And are there some inefficiencies that we can remove? And are there some things where we can add greater efficiency? And that's really what you did with that brilliant example.
Thank you for picking that up, Michael, because that's something a lot of folks don't get, is that if they have to find the money or create, the line item somewhere in the budget, now you've added a layer of complexity that is significant. But if I'm saying just reallocate some of the resources that you already have that aren't paying off for you, now not only is that easier money to find, but the manager who makes that decision when it goes well is a hero internally within the organization.
Definitely. So Scott, you've used and leveraged your books with some of the examples that you shared, which I think are fantastic, to get a seat at the table with very well-known organizations. I named just a few of your clients. You've named others. There's many more. You've also clearly got on stages in front of ideal clients, and that's turned into business and consulting projects for you. So aside from speaking and writing books, what else has worked really well for you to create visibility and really get the attention and interest of ideal clients that has led to more business?
Michael, I don't know if this is I don't have the data to know if this is just unique to what I'm doing or if this applies to others out there, although my gut feel is that it would. And that is, there's no silver bullet. The magic is in the mix. And it is that, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I have a podcast, I do blogs. And it's not that there's going to be any one of those that creates this enormous opportunity. But I kind of think what happens is that if, Jane Doe at the XYZ company sees a tweet every once in a while and then, stumbles across a podcast and listens to that, then it might inspire her to get the book if she sees that at the airport, which I think it's more time consuming and tougher, and we have to be more disciplined in doing that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be that they stumble upon us or find us. Or what I want is that if I make a direct approach, that there's somebody at the table that goes, yeah, that name's familiar. Or, oh, that's the guy that speaks about becoming iconic. Or, so that you build a brand that has at least enough recognition that it gets you by the gatekeeper.
Yeah. I think that's really good examples and truth, right? Of reaching people from lots of different channels, creating kind of like this omnipresence in the marketplace. But I think as you talk about that, and like what I'd just love to explore a little bit around this is, how do you manage your time, right? So you're doing podcasts, you're writing books, you're speaking, you're delivering on client projects. What a lot of consultants find, Scott, is I'm sure you have as well, is that as demand for your services increases and you're delivering more, you then have less time to work on your own business and your marketing and so forth. So what have you found that has helped you to scale your consulting business and your practice, just everything that you do? What is your approach to managing time and ultimately has allowed you to ensure that you're always still able to do marketing even though you're delivering?
Michael, I'm glad you asked me that question, because if you ask my executive assistant or my wife, they would both probably give you a different answer about my ability to manage my time and my effort. One of the things is I've gotten a whole lot better at saying no to things.
So important. Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to get certain invitations, and I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but you have to get really good at saying no to things.
Can you offer some examples around this? Like, when you say no to things, what does that mean? You don't have to name specific people or organizations if you don't want to, but just so people can, I'm interested really in understanding, Scott, what is your decision-making kind of filter or criteria that you apply to saying no? Because I agree with you. It's so important to say no. And it's something that as you become more and more successful, you need to get better at.
The opportunity to speak somewhere that I know will not provide other opportunities, either in terms of consulting or training or future speeches or anything like that. I don't have the time or energy to do a bunch of one-offs. This sounds like I'm, I know this will sound, but for example, when you asked me to this podcast, I was excited about that because, this is what I do and this is my wheelhouse. And this is, the chance to communicate with other folks that are going through the same trials and tribulations and challenges that I do. Man, that's great. But I get invitations to be on podcasts that I know no one, it has no special, again, clarity. If the podcast is generic and the podcaster can't describe the audience and, I can't take 45 minutes to do that. I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but yet if you do all those, then it doesn't give you time to do the significant ones like this one. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so the question that we always ask is, and then what? Right? So, Scott, would you like to come speak to this meeting? We might not say that to the client, but in our office, we'll say, and then what? Would this lead to other speeches? Would this lead to a deeper relationship? Is the organization significant enough, or are the audience members significant enough that it will provide additional opportunity? And I think you can ask that from day one, because when you start asking that question, then it raises your antenna about the opportunity of every consulting engagement and every speech and everything that you can do. And I get all these invitations. I'm sure that you and a lot of your listeners do too. And they say, this will be great exposure. Well, people have died from exposure.
Yeah, they sure have. Yeah.
Typically my experience, and I did a lot of those in the early days, and typically my experience was it exposed me to other people that wanted free services. Right. And so we have to be very, very careful about that. So the question I would suggest that folks ask is, and then what? Because maybe there are some free engagements that you want to take because it would lead to, for example, consulting with a charity whose board of directors are all influential leaders might be a great project to take because it would expose you to people who can make significant decisions later on.
Mm-hmm.
Just by asking that question, we don't have time for one-offs.
Yeah.
What could this do? What could this lead to? How could this help us? And the other thing, and I neglected asking this at the beginning, what do I want to do? How many times have you said yes to something and you didn't really want to, but you said yes to it? And the closer it gets on your calendar, the more you're kicking yourself because you said yes.
Mm-hmm.
I've started asking the question, is this something I want to do? I mean, will I enjoy doing this? Look, we're always at our best, both personally and professionally, when we're doing those activities that we enjoy doing. I want to put myself in more situations where there is a high enjoyment factor.
Yeah, I think those are very wise words. So important. I mean, the one thing that all of us share is that we have time in terms of like we have the choice to do what we have or what we want to do with that time, but we can never recreate it. And so really being very clear on what is meaningful for us and living our life so that we don't have regrets. I think what you share right now is such a great way for us to end this conversation here today, because I really want people to think about this. I think this one point can really help you to hone in so that you spend time on areas of your business and your life that will allow you to get the greatest value and return from it, rather than spending a whole bunch of time on things that don't really move the needle for you, both personally, professionally, your health, wellness. There's so many different ways that this kind of concept can apply. And this has really been great. So Scott, I want to thank you for coming on. Before we jump off though, let me ask you one quick question,
Sure.
Which is, what are you reading right now? Or what is just maybe the best book that you've read in the last little while?
This is going to seem so strange, but Bad Blood, about Theranos, the blood testing company that turned out to be just a fraud. It is so well written, but the way that some really, really smart people were simply captivated by charisma and didn't look beyond the surface was absolutely fascinating to me, and a very cautionary tale as well, because I think that might be part of our job as consultants is to say when the emperor has no clothes. I want to be a positive force for my clients, but it doesn't help my clients for me to ignore when things are wrong. And this was really a very well written. I mean, the funny thing is, if it wasn't true, if this was a fiction, it wouldn't sell 10 copies because it's so unbelievable. Right. But the fact that, 2 former secretaries of state are on their board of directors and they're making all these claims, and it's a real cautionary tale about the need for, I don't want to say that style isn't important, because style can connect you with people and help lead them. But if you have all style and no substance, you're heading for a fall. And that's dramatically brought out in this book.
All right. Well, that's going on my list because I have not read that, but it sounds very interesting. Scott, what is the best way for people to just learn more about you and your work?
Oh, I appreciate you asking, Michael. ScottMcKain.com is our basic, point of getting to know me. By the way, my last name is spelled McKain, a little bit differently than the most popular spelling. Yeah, we also have a website that's called DistinctionNation.com. DistinctionNation.com. And Michael, we usually only offer this to people that are in the audiences at presentations that I do. But if anybody listening to your podcast would like to go there, there's a free ebook that you can download. There is a 14-day program on creating personal distinction in your profession that's available there. There is nothing there for anybody to buy, even if they wanted to. It is a service that provide to audience members. And if anybody from your audience would like to go there, they're certainly welcome to it as well. It's just DistinctionNation.com. You can download a book, download the audio, other free resources and videos there for you.
Fantastic. Well, again, Scott, thank you so much. We're going to make sure to have all that linked up in the show notes so that people can access those resources, which they should certainly check out. Also, make sure that you take a look at Scott's books, 7 of those books. I thought there was only 5, so I'm going to be now hunting to find out what those other.
Well, Iconic just came out. In fact, it's brand new. So
okay, well, there we go.
Bet,
so yeah, I'll definitely be diving to that. Scott, again, thank you so much for coming on.
Michael, what a privilege to be asked. Thank you. I hope we cross paths soon. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.